Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Midwestern Marx live stream. The Philosopher and the Grappler. We're going to do a little Ask Me Anything today, so I hope you guys got your questions prepared because we are prepared to answer them. Should be a fun little Sunday night laid-back stream. Welcome to all of our new followers and all of our new subscribers. We've been experiencing a ton of YouTube growth lately, which is amazing. If you're not yet subscribed or if you don't have notifications on, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell. Also, be sure to like, share, and leave a comment on the stream to help boost us in the algorithm, boost the important message and truth telling that we do on this channel. And without further ado, we'll play the Intergenerational and then get into it. All right. I forgot to mention also in the intro, we have a comrade from Bolivia coming on to update us about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Same guy who did the Bolivia documentary that we just uploaded. But yeah, how's it going, Carlos?
It's going really good, man. Been getting a lot of work done and very excited to do one of these laid back streams. I feel like we haven't done one in a while. I think they have their role in our broadcasts and all the other stuff we've been doing. I think has been great. There's been a lot of learning that I've done, having Scott on, having Professor Ness on, but some good old laid back streams are always fun.
Absolutely. Get some direct audience interaction and hopefully meet some of the new people who have joined the Midwestern Marx squad recently. So first of all, longtime viewer, Cobra Commander, one of our trusted moderators, said, "What inspires you?" Question for both Carlos and Eddie. Great question, Cobra. Thank you. And thank you for everything that you do for our institute as well. I would say it's hard for me because when it comes to it's hard for me to answer that question because when it comes to things that I genuinely care about and that I genuinely like doing, I'm not a person who lacks motivation. I'm not a person who lacks drive. I'm not a person who lacks passion. I tend to have that sort of overflowing, even sometimes my passion and my ability to work hard even supersedes my skill or my aptitude for something, and I'm able to overcome a lack of skill or a lack of natural talent with hard work and with passion. That's kind of been like the MO for my entire life. But I don't know, man, when I figured out, like, I've always felt, I remember saying, like, in government classes in high school, like, why are we spending all this money on drones and why are we spending all this money on warfare and bombs and not investing that money in education, in healthcare, and things that made sense? Like, that was always the core of my politics. And then when I found out what socialism was, I'm like, okay, this just seems like common sense. But it confused me that the people who considered themselves Marxists and who considered themselves socialists didn't seem that urgent to try and spread socialism, to try and recruit new people to socialism, to try and educate people about socialism. so we can actually change the system. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of the reason is the collapse of the USSR was just such a freaking blow to the global socialist movement, including here in the United States. It turned a lot of people away from revolutionary politics. But I don't know, the way I look at it, I look at the way that the world is. I look at the way that the capitalist mode of production is organized, and the modern global neoliberal economy is organized. I just think this can't stand. How are we allowing this? How are humans so freaking intelligent and able to create so much, amazing technology and things like that, and yet we're still fighting wars for conquest with each other? We still have millions of people starving. We still have hundreds of thousands of people dying because they don't have access to basic healthcare, and all of this stuff is unnecessary, right? We have the technology to and the productive forces to feed everybody, to provide everybody healthcare, but because of the way that our system and our productive forces and that labor is organized, we allow millions of people to die. So for me, I wake up and feel that urgency every day, like, what the hell are we doing? And if we don't start now, if we don't start moving people towards socialism now, maybe it'll never happen. Like we may never get to see the fruits of our labor. We may just be sowing the seeds for a socialist revolution that comes years and years and years from now, after the American consciousness has changed. But if we don't start changing the American consciousness, who will? And if the more that we put it off, and the more that we say, well, America's anti-communist, so we might as well not even try, the further off we're pushing the potential of a socialist revolution. So that's kind of a long answer, but yeah, that's what inspires me. What inspires me is people, humanity, my friends and family who I feel like are being exploited by a ridiculous, anarchic and contradictory system that's completely outdated and unnecessary at this stage of humanity's development.
That's beautiful to hear. And I share a lot of that as well. I've mentioned this a few times, but my grandfather is someone who was very influential for me growing up, in ways that it's been only after his death that I've been able to reflect on how influential he's been for, just the way I carry myself. And he taught me something that I, after becoming a Marxist, realized was something from Che and the process of transforming social consciousness in Cuba, which was, every time that there would be like a situation where people are affected, it doesn't matter what part of the world they're in. He taught me to always have like a connection to that suffering as if it was my family, a deep sense of empathy. And that's developed into like a deep sense of sadness when a struggle in one part of the world loses, and a deep sense of joy when the struggle in one part of the world wins. So in terms of like motivation and the stuff that gets me pumped, gets me emotional, it's those sorts of victories, the anger of the step backs, the anger of realizing the conditions that people are in, the people around me, myself included. I'm part of this reproletariat class that lives in utter poverty and debt slavery. But to be honest, I think that, and I wonder if you'd agree, this is something that was true for me when I was an athlete and is true now. I think motivation is less important than discipline, and just crafting the right habits. There's a lot of times where I'm not motivated to do something, and I still have to do it, and that's something the ability to do that is a result of discipline, not motivation. If we wait till we're motivated to do stuff, we'll do a very small fraction of the things that we end up doing. So I do a whole lot of things out of discipline, and I think I've said it maybe a time or two before, that what I really like, what my profession is philosophy. If it was up to me, I'd spend 90 something. If we were already in socialism, I'd spend most of my time just writing philosophy and doing, interpretive hermeneutic work of various classical texts, stuff that's hard to decipher. But I have a sense of duty to like contribute whatever I can to the class struggle. And so again, a lot of that work, yeah, it motivates me, but I do it out of discipline and a sense of duty, oftentimes more than just motivation.
Absolutely. And I agree. That's what you'll hear from a lot of high level athletes. Like, you're not always going to be motivated, right? But if you promised yourself that you were going to do something, if you promised yourself that you were going to do 2 practices a day, because that's what you need to do to get ready for the competition, then you should hold yourself accountable to do 2 practices a day. You know, we not every week we want to do 3-4 streams, but we hold ourselves accountable and do good work. And then usually once you throw yourself into it, once you start practicing or whatever, then you kind of gain some motivation. You get the endorphins flowing. You know, it's forcing yourself to start doing something. But yeah, I would encourage everybody to join a party or some way, some kind of collective group where you can hold each other accountable as well. Because if Midwestern Marx, I think if I speak for any of us, if it was just me or just Carlos or just Noah, who knows if Midwestern Marx would even still be going, and it would be a fraction of what it is today. You know, we communicate with each other every single day, not just as like, what are we doing today, but like as friends, like encouraging each other with life, being there to support each other when rough things inevitably happen. So yeah, you also need a group that can hold each other accountable, and you can help each other learn and develop and critique when critique is necessary. Um,
Uh, can I just say something real quick?
yeah.
Another thing that was a huge factor, and I didn't know if it was going to be or not, but after the birth of my son,
Mm.
a little over 11 months ago, it adds like a new sense of urgency because you feel the sense of duty that I was mentioning is not like limited to just like your generation or something or to your lifespan. It becomes something intergenerational. Like you feel like you have a duty to your kids' generation and to the generations after that as well. So at the personal level, that's another thing that you know fighting so that even if I don't experience it in my lifetime, maybe he can.
I know Diego Rusarin, our buddy, says the same thing. Who I was lucky enough to go on his show last week, and we'll be having him on our show this week. Says something very similar when his son was born. It was I believe it was his son. When his child was born, though, it was this big sense of, holy crap, the world that I'm leaving behind for him or leaving him to inherit is really, really messed up. And it's not designed to allow my son to flourish. It's designed to exploit them. And the term that Diego uses, which has become a popular term in the era of neoliberalism, is human capital. And Diego kind of mocks that term and says, when my son was born, I realized even more than I already had that humans are so much more than human capital. That humans have all these capabilities, and with love and support and a positive environment, human beings can flourish and do all these amazing things. But we need care, we need community, we need each other. And that's just not what we get in this cutthroat, individualistic, consumeristic, neoliberal society. So it makes sense that it's inspiring that having a kid makes people want to change the system. Not something I've experienced myself yet, but makes perfect sense. Thank you, Battle Cossack, for the super chat from Argentina. The Lorax in the original was a degrowther. I don't know. I've heard that argument made. I got to go back and watch the Lorax. I like to think of the Lorax as like an eco-socialist, like quoting Marx and talking about metabolic rift and stuff. But maybe he was a degrowther. I don't remember the plot of the movie well enough. Do you, Carlos?
I've never seen it. I know what it is, but I've never seen it, so I can't comment on it.
Gotcha. Well, maybe that's a Midwestern Marx movie review for the future. Remember watching a report on Canal 26 of Argentina about Venezuelan prisons and criticize that they were cleaner and have pools and gyms for the prisoners? Like, that's a sign of corruption. I saw that the other day. There was this guy who calls himself the News Daddy on TikTok, and we've responded to him before. He's okay. He does good news. Sometimes he'll just repeat what's in the corporate media and say some shit like Russia blew up their own Nord Stream pipeline. It's just like, come on, dude, use your brain. But it's a like high school kid, or college age kid who's really popular. But they reported on that the other day, and we're showing these Venezuelan prisons with like pools and gyms and all these crazy things. And they were saying that the prisoners had taken over the prison and built all those things themselves. And then the government came in and gained control over it again. Seems like not real to me, right? Like I just on the face of it, I haven't looked into it, but it didn't pass the smell test. I'm like, what, these prisoners took over the prison and instead of leaving, they built a pool. Like, I don't understand the logic, but yeah, interesting that they try and play that off as a sign of corruption. They always do that with socialist countries' prisons, like the gulags. They gave, they were focused on rehabilitation. You'd get like a living wage, versus the prisons in America are just totally based on extracting profit off of the prisoners. The prisons are the only place where you don't have to pay employees minimum wage. It's just a huge fucking scam. We have more prisoners per capita than any other country by far, like 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. And yet we're over here talking about the prison systems in socialist countries that are far more humane than ours.
Maybe too humane. Gotta have more gusanos in there. Keep the pool, but some more re-education would be good.
Agreed. Thank you, Battle Coast Sack. The force is strong with you, my sons. Thank you, Ross. The force is strong with you as well, comrade. Appreciate the constant support and the donation. What Carlos said about his kids is why I'm holding off on having any. I personally must do more locally for me to even consider it. Living in Oklahoma here. Oh, interesting, Jake. I've spent quite a bit of time in Oklahoma. There are a couple wrestling tournaments that they hold in Tulsa, and it's always striking. Right when you drive into Tulsa, there's a big homelessness problem, and then a big fat billboard that says it's an advertisement for a bank giving people loans on bail bonds. So if your buddy or your family member gets arrested, you can take out a loan for a bond to get them out of jail, to bail them out of jail, but then you're going to be paying back interest to the bank. So it's a means of trapping people in debt via arresting their relatives and arresting their friends, and just truly predatory. And you can see that the city of Tulsa is kind of falling apart. So it's really sad. But yeah, I'm in a similar position, Jake, where it's like, I mean, I'm so focused on Midwestern Marx and wrestling right now. It'd be really, really hard for me to have like a relationship and start a family, but it's not even really a thought in my mind now, because I want to become more financially stable before I even do it, which is the case for most 20-year-olds living in America. Most people feel like they can't meet their basic needs, and because of that, they're putting off having children, which the World Economic Forum seems to be promoting with this sort of degrowth, anti-human agenda that they're pushing. But yeah. Thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Got anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was going to be like that before I had a baby. Like it was going to limit me, and there's some ways where, to be honest, it does. But there's other aspects of it that make the limitations worth it. But to each his own, if a lot of people don't have the financial means to have a kid. I mean, we thought we didn't. We still went with it, and to some extent, we still don't. But we're trying our best. So it is what it is, and it's been a joy, honestly. Regardless of whatever struggles, it's been a joy, and like I mentioned, the motivation to fight for a better society for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks a ton, Jake. Let's go. What do you guys think about the U.S. wanting to invade Mexico to fight the cartels? I mean, I gave my analysis of this on Diego Rusarin's show, and it was clipped into a little short, YouTube short or whatever. So if people want to see that, maybe not a short, but like a 3-minute video. So if people want my full analysis and breakdown of that, check out my appearance on Diego Rusarin's show. But it's absurd. It's absurd. I mean, the U.S. always does this. They claim that they're fighting the drug war in Colombia, and that's why the DEA and these U.S. military bases are in Colombia. When year after year, drug dealing and drug trafficking goes up in Colombia, the DEA is doing nothing to stop it. All they're doing is looking out for U.S. economic interests and helping to arm and back and support these right-wing paramilitaries who keep the socialist forces in Colombia at bay. And they justify it all by saying, we're there to fight drug trafficking. And that's exactly what they're trying to do with Mexico. And it's so discouraging because Trump was at least positioning himself as an anti-imperialist candidate. He was talking about ending the war in Ukraine, end the wars. I'm going to be the retribution of the working class. I'm going to do this, that, and the other, and end all these U.S. wars, just like he was saying in 2016. Then he didn't do shit. I'm sorry. I know some people had hope for Trump as an anti-imperialist candidate, but he literally put John Bolton, Mike Pompeo in his cabinet, and then was getting advised from Elliot Abrams about Venezuela policy. Like, these are architects of the Iraq War. And now him and Lindsey Graham, another one of the arch neocons, another one of the uniquely bad politicians in America, which, the bar is set extremely low, are pushing for this idea to invade Mexico when we haven't even held the damn pharmaceutical companies who created the opioid crisis responsible. The Sackler family are still one of the richest families in the country. And the legal system's not doing anything about it, or not doing anything to punish them for creating the opioid crisis by spending millions and millions and millions of dollars marketing opioids to medical universities, to doctors, to patients. And yet we're talking about invading another country to fight the cartels when we have systematized drug dealers here at home, when some of the richest and most powerful people in society, the pharmaceutical industry, are a major reason that so many people are addicted to opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. So the idea that we have to start a new war to end drug dealing when we could just turn our focus here at home is absurd. And any real anti-imperialist candidate should be saying, take all the money we're spending in Ukraine and elsewhere and invest that in, cracking down on the pharmaceutical industry, invest it at home. But instead of doing that, they're arguing for another war. It's interesting how the imperialists always find a way to argue for more war. More war is the solution to fucking everything, right? Well, we don't have healthcare, more war. We don't have, the pharmaceutical companies are dosing our people with opioids, and we have cities where people are walking around like zombies because they're addicts. Start a fucking war. I mean, it's just so stupid.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I think part of that discourse, specifically from Trump, that's what leads people on the left who can't tell what the substance of fascism is to call him a fascist, because they go by one of the frequently found accidental properties of fascism. And accidental, I don't mean that in the sense that it's by mistake. I mean that in the sense that it's not one of the substantial things that makes fascism. And that's the scapegoating of a certain group as a way of outsourcing the issues of capitalism and how they're felt in the working class. You outsource it to a scapegoated group. And that's been a feature of some forms of fascism, without a doubt. It's not the substance of it, but a lot of people, since they think of fascism in a very idealistic form, they consider that to be one of the substantial elements. So they see this rhetoric that is used by Trump and others on the Republican Party about Mexico and Mexicans and immigrants and all this stuff, and it naturally leads to that idea. And that's not to say that there aren't fascistic parts at play, but the substance is not that. And you could find equally scapegoating narratives coming from the Democratic Party. The issues that we felt as working class folks at the pump and at the grocery stores, and that we still feel, for a very long time, the Democrats were blaming it on Russia. And, I don't know about you, this might be controversial, but I still consider Russia to be part of the global South. It's been since 1917, at least to me, a part of the the global south. And I know a lot of scholars agree with this narrative. Lasordo, we just spoke with Ness, he mentioned that, that's how he thinks of it too. So does China. China's another country, it's a non-imperialist great power, but it's still a country of the global south, a country having to combat imperialism. And it's a country that's constantly being scapegoated by both sides of the ruling American elite. Um, so I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, invading Mexico is just it's so stupid. It's like it feeds into the joke that I saw a British comedian make recently. I'm forgetting what the buildup was, but the punchline was it was like America invading Iraq because of a bombing that was done by the Saudis or whatever. Um, it's like the U.S. invading Mexico because of a crisis that was created by American pharmaceutical industrial companies. It makes no sense at all. But you have to do a whole lot of lying in order for it to make sense. I don't think the American people are gonna buy it, but we'll see.
Yep, time will tell. Time will tell. Battle Cossack, I've joined the Patreon recently. Thank you so much, Battle Cossack. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarx for those who want to be a part of that. If you join our Patreon, even if you're just a $1 supporter, you get access to the Midwestern Marx Discord server where you can contact Carlos, me, Kyle Pettis, a lot of other people associated with Midwestern Marx who have worked with us in the past. That's the best way to support us financially, is all your money will go directly to us rather than YouTube taking a cut, which we appreciate all the super chats, of course, and encourage super chats. But if you want less of your money getting taken by corporations and Silicon Valley oligarchs, Patreon is the way to go. Plus, if you're a $10 Patreon supporter, you'll get access to Carlos's book, The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism. YouTube members also get access to that, but it's just a really, really fantastic value, $10 for an excellent book, and you'll be first on the list to get our next book project that we release on Patreon. So yeah, a great way to support the show and get some cool rewards.
We have a long question here from Hupne Big Ban. As citizens in the imperial core, we know the risks that come with making our ideology public. You have each personally suffered from smear campaigns by liberals. I've heard JT from Second Thought and Brett O'Shea have been personally visited by the FBI. So with the historical evidence for how communist/union leaders were treated by fascists, how do you guys find the courage to fight for what you believe in, even at such great personal risk? Thank you so much for that, comrade. At least for me personally, I don't know. I'm just not scared of. I feel like we maybe naively we live in a different era. I just can't see the elite getting away with the sort of political assassinations they did in the '60s. The conditions are way too different, and what they stand to lose if one of those assassinations really triggers the American people into acting in a revolutionary manner is everything. So, especially when they have the power of censorship, I feel like they'll censor you before anything else. I don't think they'll go around killing you. So there's not a lot of fear. The biggest fear is like that they'll censor something that is the main medium that we use to help people develop socialist and class consciousness. But other fears, such as death or bad employment, are not really one of my concerns, to be honest.
Yeah, I lost a job already amid people calling and emailing and demanding that I be fired. And the only thing I can really think when that happens is this Eminem song from the Slim Shady LP. It's a really poetic song called "I Just Don't Give a Fuck." I mean, that's about all there is to it. My roommate was asking me this the other day, like, are you scared ever that you're on a list or that they're going to come for you? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I am on a list, but like, you almost just have to, and this is what all the great revolutionaries like Sankara and Che did. If you hear them talk, like, they not embrace death, like you don't want to die, but it's a possibility. And, you know, death is a part of life. Everything comes to an end, including life. So it's better to embrace it for what it is, you know, rather than fight it off and pretend that we're going to be able to stave off death forever. And hopefully I die like Fidel Castro when I'm 100 years old, living in a socialist society that I helped create. That's the dream. But that's probably not going to happen. But either way, you know, if the way that I go is by fighting for socialism, by fighting against the capitalist ruling class, then that is what it is. That's my life's purpose. And if that ends up leading to the end of my life, I've come to terms with that, and I'm okay with that. As far as coming for for my employment stuff, they already have. The thing is, we're too damn powerful for them. I mean, we're getting so much funding from the audience, which is constantly increasing. Our audience size is constantly increasing. The amount of money we make from ads and super chats and Patreon supporters is increasing. And as long as we get that support directly from the people, we're kind of untouchable. Like, they have to kill us or completely delete our accounts like they did with TikTok, which is always a possibility. But, you know, we've showed that we have the ability to bounce back from that as well. So yeah, all I can say is I just don't give a fuck.
And there's also a whole lot of people doing, leading other efforts, other important efforts as well. So a good portion of our work is educational. Um, and I mean, historically, it's the MLKs and the Fred Hamptons and the people who are not like sitting back and just analyzing it and educating that. I mean, everyone has a different role, but um, you know, there's people that have the capacity to be far more active, organizing on the ground, that have, you know, my wholehearted respect, and I feel like in the struggle I play a different role, you know, and that's important to know. They sent Caldwell, who was the leading theorist of the Communist Party of Great Britain. They sent him out to the Spanish Civil War to fight, and he died at a youthful 33 years. We would have had. I mean, it's always folly to speculate, but one of the most impressive young communist minds lost at just 33 years of age for doing something that perhaps wasn't what the revolution demanded of him. Same thing with Jose Marti. The fuck was he doing on a white horse? The first day, dead. What the fuck are you doing? Go back to writing poems and moving the people and do something else. So I don't know. I grew up with these sorts of jokes about Marti. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I'm just. I guess I'm not scared. Oh, you're muted, Eddie.
We don't have to send Carlos out to the front lines on a white horse, just yet.
Leave me with Hegel in the back.
He'll just go throw like copies of the phenomenology at people.
Yeah.
That'll teach them.
We'll have a catapult with the science of logic, and I'll be back there just bloop, catapulting copies of the science of logic to folks. That'll be my role.
It's a powerful weapon. I lost track. Okay. Let me see here. Will there ever be a Midwestern Marx live meetup? Yes, definitely. Hoping to do that sooner rather than later.
Eddie will be at a conference in Chicago, by the way, fairly soon.
October 8th, right?
Yeah. Let me see if I could bring that up. It's hosted by the folks from Revolution Report, our comrade Donald Corder from Russia, and it's got Jeff Munson there, who's a very famous communist wrestler. I know Eddie certainly loves him. He's talked a whole lot about him to me in the past. I don't know. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Eddie?
Yeah, it's Donald Corder, who's awesome. I mean, living in Russia and a Marxist. Just the other day when in our stream with Scott Ritter, someone kept saying like, "Who the f is this guy? Why don't you talk to a Russian Marxist?" And we have Donald Corder's a Russian. He's not Russian, but he lives in Russia and he's a Marxist and he has the same exact position as Scott Ritter. But either way, Christopher Halali's really great. He's run for office as a communist. I'm really excited to meet him. I've been following him for a while, and yeah, Jeff Munson has been one of my heroes forever. He's just this jacked MMA fighter who's been like a journeyman. He's fought in like every big time MMA organization in the world, the UFC, Pride, Strike Force, I believe, as well as a bunch of smaller ones. And when I learned that he was a communist and that he had moved to the Donbass, it was a huge inspiration for me. You know, it gets a little lonely out here being a communist combat sports athlete, and our ranks are certainly growing. Every time I go to a wrestling tournament now, somebody tells me how much they love Midwestern Marx, which is encouraging. But it's going to be awesome to meet with Jeff Munson, who's been at it for a while and is really one of the only people who can fully relate to me. I feel like as somebody involved in wrestling, combat sports, and also communism. And I'm excited to talk to him about the way that communism is viewed in the combat sports community. But can I play a Jeff Munson video real quick? I want to bring this up to him. This has nothing to do with socialism or communism. I mean, you can see he's got like a communist red star tattooed on him. But this is just a promotion that he did a while back for this tiny fight organization, and I just think it's really funny. Like this is how I learned who Jeff Munson was, watching this.
You like watching people get fucked for free? Watch me fuck up Mark Kerr for free on DonKingTV.com live Saturday, September 27th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. DonKingTV.com. I'm gonna fuck him up. I'm gonna put these hands right around his face and beat his ass. You watch us live for free. DonKingTV.com.
That's what I'm going to do to the bourgeoisie. I'm going to fuck them up. I'm going to put these hands right around their face for free.
You could tell he's a kind guy because that seemed like it was difficult for him to do.
He had to force that one.
Yeah. Not like good old Mike Tyson. He's fellow comrade. It's got Che and is it Mao tattooed on him?
Yep. Read him in prison.
Have you seen that video where they tell him like a script to read off and he reads it wrong like 72 times in a row?
No.
It's so incredibly funny.
There's his Che tattoo. There's his Mao tattoo. He actually read them in prison too. It's not like he's just co-opting the aesthetic or anything. Which makes sense as like a warrior, as someone who fights people for a living. There's no one really more inspiring than Che and Mao, like leading their own people in a revolutionary movement against the ruling class, fighting in battle while also writing theory, and huge inspirations, or they should be. Obviously, we're lied to about them a lot. But thank you so much for the 249. I don't even know what currency that is. Let me look it up. Norwegian krones. All right. First time we've gotten some Norwegian krones. So thank you, Lorenz. Thoughts on Roberto Bolano? I'm not familiar with Roberto Bolano. Are you, Carlos?
Very little. I saw maybe an interview that he did maybe 6-7 years ago. But no, I haven't read much. I'm sorry.
Maybe someone for us to look into in the future, but sorry, we can't answer your question more in depth, comrade, but thank you for the super chat. Always helps what we're doing here at the Institute. Of course, all of our funding comes from you, the people. This August, Boris Kagarlitsky, a prominent Russian Marxist theoretician, was brought to the prison by the Russian government on false accusations of terrorism. Do you have any thoughts about that? Thanks. Thank you for the $10 super chat. No idea about that. I would take anything that the Western media says about what the Russian government is doing with a huge grain of salt. Yeah, I would look to see if maybe the KPRF, the Communist Party, has any statements on it. Maybe that could be something we ask Donald about too next time that we have him on the Revolution Report, the guy who's putting that conference together, because he's living in Moscow and he just has a much deeper and more direct understanding of Russia than us, just because he lives there. But yeah, I don't know. Did you hear anything about this, Carlos?
I did not. I don't know if that person's a member of the KPRF. I know the KPRF has been basically the pioneer in the policy that United Russia has been taking now with the war. They've been big proponents of doing this since 2014, and they consider it an existential fight against fascism. So I wonder why, if something like that happened, why it would happen. Maybe the Boris person wasn't in line with the party. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to comment if I don't know.
Seems like he was anti-SMO, which obviously isn't a reason to arrest someone, but interesting to note. But yeah, thank you so much, Ivan, for the $10 super chat. Hope to look into that more and get back to you. I just want to talk to some of the friends that we have who are experts. Obviously, our standard is to not talk about stuff if we don't have background knowledge or haven't done full research. But yeah, thank you. Great question. Sir Mag 22 just wanted to send us $10 with no question. So thanks, comrade. Appreciate that very much. What are your thoughts on the current socialist parties in the U.S.? CPUSA?
I guess there's the question. Yeah. There's a Sir Max question.
Oh, very cool. Okay. Yeah. So, CPUSA and PSL. Yeah. The flawed parties that need work and need good people and theoretically educated people to go into them and change them and direct them towards the masses. My main critique, I guess I'll just say it, because might as well, because I'm a part of CPUSA and I like these parties. I believe in these parties. I believe in being part of a party and doing organizing work locally. But my main gripe with PSL is they're just movementism. They're focused on activism. They're focused on protests, and talking to people who are at protests, who by and large are going to be people that already agree with us, right? And there's been reports from people within PSL that when they try and direct their party towards working class organizing, towards more trade union based organizing, towards getting into the workplaces in the communities, not just going to protests where there are activists, those have kind of been rejected by some of the PSL leadership, and they've decided to keep going with this movementist strategy. Now, I think the protests they're doing are great. I think PSL's line is, on almost everything is really good. There's anti-imperialist when it comes to not only the existing socialist countries, but Iran and Russia and some of the anti-imperialist great powers. And they have a really good line on that stuff, and they do a lot of really good protests. But I don't know if those protests are moving us close to revolution or are doing enough to organize the working class. And I would criticize that as movementism. CPUSA has flaws in how they look at the bourgeois political parties and the two-party duopoly, and seeing the Democrats as less capitalistic, less imperialistic, and less fascistic than the Republicans, which at Midwestern Marx, we believe they're not, and we believe that it's a dead end to spend time organizing for Democrats, working within Democratic Party primaries, working within the Democratic Party at all. We should be working outside the Democratic Party. That's the point of having a communist party, so you can get workers into it, use it to educate workers, use it to build up communities and organize. So two vital parties and important parties with a lot of history. But I mean, if we got to be honest about the struggle we're facing and the conditions we're in, two parties that definitely have their flaws, as any party does.
Right, and these are not condemnations. We're not purity fetishists. We're anti-purity fetishists. That's a big part of what our work is revolves around. But yeah, I mean, there are flaws. I think in many ways, from what I've seen, we have a lot of good friends in both parties. Some of us are part of either one or the other, and but I think that without a doubt, there's one that's perhaps doing a little bit more, and in terms of line, is a lot closer to our thinking, especially when it comes to elections. Yeah, it's very sad, the line of analysis that we're seeing from such a historic party like CPUSA. Um, to be frank, I think a lot of it is actually, I don't. Yeah, I'll refrain judgment.
We don't have to get too deep into it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I was gonna say something too, but I shouldn't.
But I think if it is what we have, we don't have like a 2 million member communist party that we can just be like, oh, forget these, join this organization. It's in many ways, in terms of organizations on the left, the most advanced, and I think perhaps PSL would be a little bit more advanced in terms of its current form, and really have a lot of good theoreticians in there. A lot of our good friends from the U.S. are in that party, and they're doing quite a bit of stuff. There's an angle you could take to critique them on movementism or whatever, but at least they're somewhat active outside of the two-party duopoly. And I've been seeing a whole lot of stuff coming from them within the UAW strike, which I think is very positive. If there was a critique that I had of PSL some years ago, was that they were really good on anti-imperialism, but they seemed very disconnected from the working class. And that seems to be changing with how close they've been to the UAW strike. A lot of the best videos I've seen about it have come from them. And other stuff too.
Yeah, I don't know. Biden's also at the UAW strike. Like I get that that's a good step in the right direction, but it's also the bare minimum, and it's a huge labor uprising that's going on. So I'm not willing to say like, oh, they've abandoned movementism because they went to the UAW strike. I think it's got to go a lot deeper than that. I think you have to be building connections with the working class for years leading up to the UAW strike. But yeah, it is great to see. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah,
for sure. Although Biden is the true working class candidate by showing up there, so
he's got our backs.
He does. Bidenomics is working.
As a so-called working class publication put out a couple years ago. We have a good question here. Do you think you'll be doing more videos talking about socialism in Africa, such as Ghana, Mozambique, Algeria? We've been doing a lot more as we've been educating ourselves, especially since the onslaught of all these recent coups in the Sahel region. But we were before that as well. I'd like to remind people that neither Eddie nor I are like in our mid-50s, so we haven't had like decades to be able to study the whole world. Eventually we'll get there, but I personally at least have been making a large part of my geopolitical studies be centered on Africa.
Yeah, I've talked about this since 3 years ago. Like Latin America has always been my focus, and China has caught up to that in the last 3 years probably, but and in other countries in Asia like Laos and Vietnam. But when it comes to Africa and Europe, that had been a weak point for me, and the two are deeply intertwined because obviously they're very close to each other. Just like the Latin America is the US's back door, Africa's kind of Europe's back door, and the European powers colonized Africa, so you got to learn about them in tandem, learn about colonialism. I had taken some good Africa classes in college, but that covered colonialism. But yeah, recently this year, I would say, as all the things have been going on in Africa, I've really made some great strides in my understanding of African countries and the European powers. I've really deepened my understanding of Europe, which is super important with everything going on in Ukraine and the European countries going along with the US's proxy war against Russia, hybrid war against Russia. So yeah, definitely more videos on Africa and Europe to come as Carlos and I both deepen our understanding. And yeah, it's one of the cool parts about doing these videos is like, as we do them and as we learn and as new things come about, we get to, or as new things happen in new countries, we get to learn about them and learn about their history and study them. And like Carlos said, by the time we're 50, hopefully we'll have a pretty good grasp on all these places, like our heroes do, like Radhika Desai and Michael Hudson and VJ and even Chomsky, although we have our disagreements when they talk about, they can talk about like every country in the world for like hours on end. But what about Bob Avakian and the Revcoms? Are they still relevant? Yeah, I think they're a little silly, but a lot of history. Yeah, I don't know as much about them, but the positions that they take, all right, I don't tend to agree with. Not all of them, but
Yeah, I don't know much about him. But I was going to say, hopefully the audience doesn't have to wait till we're 50 for us to be experts on these things. Maybe in a few years, a few more years of study. I feel like Africa is going to be so essential in the coming years. So it's going to force anyone on the left, any anti-imperialists, to take up the study of the rich continent and the rich history of struggle that they have. So
for sure,
we don't have to wait till we're 50.
Right. Hopefully not. Unless I get some brain damage during a wrestling tournament or something.
Here's a good question. What are your opinions on Georg Lukács?
Ooh, that's a good question. You set this man off on a lecture.
No, I'll be quick with it. I think he is a tremendously important Marxist-Leninist philosopher. I think that the Western Marxist tradition utilizes a book he wrote that, although valuable, was part of a transition away from some neo-Kantianism and towards a more coherent dialectical materialism. And that book is History and Class Consciousness, of course, very valuable book. But in terms of its positions on certain questions, such as the question of Engels or the question of dialectics of nature and some other stuff, the book is flawed. And the Western Marxists have taken the flaws in that book up as the centerpiece of one of the centerpieces of their tradition. But we shouldn't relegate Lukács nor Gramsci, who's another person that they do this with, to the Western Marxists. These are thinkers that were Marxist-Leninists their whole lives, were active in communist parties. Lukács was confused, like the vast majority of people in the international communist movement were, by the secret speech. But before that, he was supportive of the Soviet Union. Even after that, he was supportive of the Soviet Union. But in terms of theory, his Destruction of Reason is a masterpiece. It's a book that was not criticized. It was just, it received the reaction of a hissy fit from Adorno and all the Western Marxists, because it said the truth, that bourgeois irrationalism is the product of the failure of the 1848 revolutions, and there's a deep, intimate connection between the irrationalism and bourgeois philosophy, and that found in Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Bergson, and many others, Scheler, and the forms of outlook that you find in Nazism and other forms of fascist narratives. So that is even more important in our age than perhaps it was when he actually wrote it, because today there's so many post-Marxisms and post-modernized Marxisms that bring irrationalism into Marxism. So yeah, very pro Lukács on this end.
Absolutely. I'll leave it at that. Obviously, Carlos's understanding of Lukács is better than mine, but everything I've ever read of him is awesome. And Marxist-Leninists, like Carlos said. And it's always a breath of fresh air when you read a Marxist who's a Marxist-Leninist and has that understanding of imperialism and has that support for existing socialism, because there's so many Western Marxists who don't. Guys like trots like Ernest Mandel, who will give you like 50 pages of brilliant economic analysis and then just like out of nowhere just shit on like Korea and talk about how evil the DPRK is. It's like, where the hell did this come from and what's the point of it? You don't get as much of that with or any of that in Lukács, which is great. I want this is funny. The Bob Avakian people are still around. Last week, they were burning flags outside of a Jason Aldean concert. So that's what I mean by disagreeing with their strategy. One of the first articles I wrote for Midwestern Marx was basically an article about patriotism, which sure became a hot button issue after that. But basically saying, like, what is flag burning going to do? Like, how is that going to organize workers? How is that going to make communists look good to workers? How is that going to do anything to accomplish the concrete political goals that communists have? In my opinion, it doesn't. It's just a show of rebellion, and maybe there's a time and place for it strategically, but like, what are you doing by calling yourselves communists and standing outside a Jason Aldean concert and burning flags? You're honestly just like pushing people away from communism. So don't agree with the strategy. Don't think it's practical. I think it's more just attention grabbing, probably grabbed a few headlines. But they've been doing that forever. They've been burning the American flag and then calling the Republican candidate fascist. And I don't know. I think Bob Avakian's maybe ran for office a few times, though. So they've gone back and forth. But some people have said it's also kind of culty. I don't know enough about it to speak on that. People have accused it of being like a cult of Bob Avakian. I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I'm going to run to the bathroom quick, Carlos. I'll be back.
All righty. There was a few questions here that I wanted to get to. Beto Sandoval asks, what's your take on J.A. Cohen and Analytic Marxism? I think some people within the Analytic Marxist framework have done helpful studies, but I completely reject Analytic Marxism. I consider Hegel to be, at least for scholars of Marxism, perhaps not for organizers, but for scholars of Marxism, I think Hegel is someone we must tarry with, to put it in Hegel's words himself. Perhaps the most important period of theoretical growth that I had was when I was just chomping down Hegel for a good year. And it was just the center focus of my studies. I still read whatever hot new secondary literature on Hegel comes out, and I follow with the leading Hegel journals quite closely. But it was that Hegel reading period that helped me develop a lot and re-understand Marxism in a much richer form. So the analytic tradition is directly rejecting that influence of dialectics. Like I said, in some things they're helpful, but that rejection, I rejected myself fully. Carlos, how do you balance fatherhood, husbandhood, providing for your family, physically, emotionally, spiritually, socialist organizing, and caring for yourself? Well, in a similar way that Marx had to. Marx took a few days out of his week to do a lot of intensive work. Other days, they were a lot of work, but he also spent some time with his family, and then he left one day of the week, usually Sundays, to just spend the whole day with his family. And today I spent the whole day with my family. I did some work in the morning before my wife got up, and then as soon as we could, we went out and we had a good time. Last week we went to a nice little pumpkin patch with the baby. So leave, at least if you work a lot, at least if you can, one day for the family. That's that's basically it. Jaime asks, do you think the IWW could ever see a revival in popularity? Probably not. We've been at this for a very long time, and whenever I hear IWW, I think I'm about to hear a story of, the 1910s labor movement, the 1920s labor movement. I don't think it's been relevant in more than 100 years, unfortunately. But I think part of their spirit and what they brought to the labor movement, which was the importance of industrial unionism. That's a great pamphlet by Bill Haywood on industrial unionism. I actually did a presentation on it. It was one of the first videos we ever put out. It's absolutely fundamental. Organizing working people as a class and not just as various trades or crafts is so important. And I think the way that the labor movement has developed, it's kind of naturally taken up the rational kernel of the IWW. If you look at Sean Fain speak today, he's speaking about the working class. He's not speaking about the workers in his craft. He's speaking about the working class. And if you listen to the reactions of Teamsters or people in other industries that are also fighting their own struggles, their reactions to other struggles, they're very much thinking of themselves as a class. And of their struggles as one common struggle. That's why it's so easy for them to show solidarity with each other. So that rational kernel from the IWW, I think we can see it in the labor movement today. So I wouldn't really see the point of its comeback, but it's a great historical organization that we have to understand to know the roots of American socialism.
Absolutely. How will the next communist revolution happen if the capitalist powers have massive armies and amounts of cultural influence behind them? I mean, that's how every revolution happens, and that's why it takes a while, like the French peasantry and the emergent French bourgeoisie were engaged in a class struggle with the ruling feudal overlords in the church for a long time before the French Revolution happened. And the bourgeoisie and the peasants were able to actually overthrow the aristocracy and overthrow the feudal mode of production and institute capitalism. If you look at slavery in the U.S., when the slave or the Civil War in the U.S., which was a revolutionary war that overthrew the slave-based mode of production and replaced it with capitalism, there were years and years and years of struggle between different classes that culminated in the Civil War, that culminated in this decisive moment where the northern capitalists and the slaves themselves, in a lot of cases, and wage laborers were able to overcome the enslavers who had a lot of power, a lot of money and wealth and armies that they could mobilize. And they had propagandized tons of workers workers and white Southerners using racism and other tactics to convince them that it was in their interest to fight for slavery when it clearly wasn't. So, what we need to do to counter that is build up our own institutions, build up our own sources of power, like Midwestern Marx is an educational institute that can fight theoretical battles, that can educate people and recruit people, that can debunk myths. We can train people ideologically and theoretically via our classes. We can engage in scholarly work, publish scholarly work, combating a lot of the anti-communist bourgeois scholarship, right? And the more institutions of class power that we have, the more we can combat the class power of the bourgeoisie. So we gotta build it up, and we gotta think strategically. Like, so many people think moralistically and individualistically about class struggle, and they don't think strategically. They don't think in terms of how do we win, right? They think, I don't like this, I'm going to react angrily to this on Twitter. I'm going to react emotionally to this on Twitter. I like that. This land back idea sounds good. It's a nice slogan. It's an ultra left slogan that makes me sound good. I'm going to support it without even thinking, okay, what does land back actually mean concretely? And what does that mean in terms of formulating a strategy? And what does that mean in terms of mass organizing? Because that's what we need to win, is mass organization. So, people need to think about things strategically and look at this as a battle, as a fight, as a war, as a struggle between classes that's going to wage until labor comes to dominate capital. But yeah, we need to think strategically about that and advancing our own class's interest, not just moralistically or trying to have the most left-wing sounding positions, which is what a lot of Twitter Marxists tend to do.
Very great points, Eddie. I think this is an interesting question. Do you want to give your 5, and then maybe I give my 5?
Yeah,
Be a
that's
cool
a great
to go
idea.
to clip later on.
Yeah, I love that. The lists. People love listicles.
I don't get it, but they do.
I don't get it either. I never leave one of those Watch Mojo videos feeling fulfilled. They always get to their number 1, and I'm like, oh, that's disappointing. But yeah, I got the top 5 Marxist leaders according to their success. Well, that's different than top 5 favorite. I'll go number 1. Go Lenin. Number 2, Mao. Number 3, Stalin. Number 4, Fidel Castro. And number 5, Ho Chi Minh and Kim Il Sung. They got to be tied because they basically did the same thing. Fought off the colonizers, organized their country to overthrow the French and the Japanese, Japan in the case of Korea, and the French in the case of the Vietnamese, overthrew the countries that had been colonizing them for years before immediately being invaded by the United States, who tried to take them back, tried to take these colonies back. The United States decimated both countries with bombs, killing 20% of the Korean population, something similar to the populations of Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia during the Vietnam War, just carpet bombing these countries with Agent Orange and napalm. But Kim Il Sung and Ho Chi Minh organized their countries and led their countries in battle against the imperialist invaders and won. I would put Deng Xiaoping in at number 3, tied with Stalin, as far as like the greatest inheritors of the revolution. People who led socialist construction. I don't think you get much better than Stalin and Deng. I just think they had the right idea. They had a deep understanding of Marxism, a very practical understanding of how to build socialism and continue the revolution, and build socialism in one country. Stalin's Marxism and the national question was really important back then for making practical decisions about how to treat anti-colonial movements in the global South and how to support them or not support them or whatever. So yeah, that's my jumbled list where I cheated and put certain people as tied, but it's hard. There's a lot of good Marxists.
I think you left out the most important one. My number 1 has to be by far Pol Pot. I'm just fucking with you.
Chairman Gonzalo.
Oh man,
that's good. Someone clip that, please.
Oh my god. But if it was favorite, I'd have to go with Fidel, just because the Cuban bias. But it's not. In terms of success, well, you can't have anything without the Russian Revolution. So Lenin first. I'd go Mao second, primarily because in those first 29 years of the revolution before the reform and opening up of Deng, I mean, China's rise in living standard was unheard of in the history of humanity. Up 32 years and 29 years. Like, every year they improved the living standard, the life expectancy of their people by more than a year. That's just insane. It was historic. Mao would be number 2. Stalin would be number 3. Saved the world from fascism, industrialized, showed that a socialist workers' republic could be a developed, modernized state that can go up against the most developed capitalist countries that have obtained their wealth, not just through exploiting their working classes, but through colonialism and slavery and horrific histories. He showed that socialism can battle it out with the best without having to have colonialism, slavery, and by having a state led by working people. So, regardless of any, it's undisputed that he's got to be on the list. Number 4, I'd go Fidel. Number 4, the Cuban Revolution. The influence that the Cuban Revolution has had in Latin America is, in many ways, like a resurgence of the influence that the Russian Revolution had for the world. Even the soft, left-wing, social democratic governments, they're looking back at Cuba as an example of how to fight off imperialism right under its noses. And then number 5, I'd go Deng, because without Deng, we wouldn't have had the modern China, which in many ways is a beacon of hope for humanity. If the list was 10, I think, even though we're witnessing it now, the leadership of Xi Jinping would have to be up there.
That's the good
I'd also,
sleeper pick.
Yeah. I'd also like to throw Ho and Kim Il Sung in there somewhere, but they'd have to be like 6 and 7 for me. But
It's interesting that Laos doesn't have. I'm surprised the ultras don't talk more about Laos, because they're pretty underdeveloped and still very agrarian, and they don't have these there's no Laotian communist leader that comes to mind when you think about Marxism, Leninism in Laos. And there's a lot of Maoists and ultras that fetishize the DPRK because they're not part of the IMF and World Bank, so they don't see them as capitulating the global finance capital. But in reality, the DPRK has been trying to get into the IMF and World Bank for years. It's just a way for the U.S. to starve them and prevent them from trading with other countries. So it doesn't make any sense for Western Marxists to fetishize the DPRK for that reason. But who you should fetishize, as Carlos was saying earlier, guys like Pol Pot, guys like Chairman Gonzalo, these guys had the right idea. Like, if you're a peasant living in a third world country and you don't agree with me, I'm going to shoot you. That's just simple what it is. So just kidding. Not a fan of Chairman Gonzalo or Mao. Or Pol Pot. Although,
to be fair,
Pol Pot.
I've had the chance to work with folks who had previous involvements in Sendero Luminoso, Gonzalo's organization. And although the leadership was shit, there was a lot of people in that were genuine revolutionaries and just had confused leadership. I think the situation with Pol Pot was a bit worse, but what Gonzalo did, it made it so hard for the peasantry to trust left-wing groups. It was horrific, but from what I've heard, or conversations I've had with Sebastian and a few others, there was people that within it that weren't that bad, that were committed revolutionaries and that weren't doing the sorts of things that we hear about when we hear about Sendero Luminoso.
For sure. What else do we got here?
There's one I wanted to. Relab 101 says, do you have any Marxist readings on modern day healthcare? Yeah. Eddie's article is a must if you want a Marxist analysis of the U.S. healthcare system. It's from the Journal of American Socialist Studies, issue 3. I also have issue 2. Issue 3 is coming out this year. That's right. Damn, that's a weird confusion. It's a wonderful article. I have one coming out in issue 3 that does something similar. But I would also recommend, what's her name? I can't remember her name right now. Do you know who I'm talking about, Eddie? The person that did the umbrella study on depression?
Oh, fuck.
Joanne
I
Moncrief?
cannot remember her name.
Moncrief. Joanne Moncrief, I think. She's a British scientist and a Marxist. She was the one that led an umbrella study debunking the serotonin theory of depression. And I've done a few articles. I did an article on that, elaborating on that, and bringing a philosophical analysis to why the sciences failed there, and dialectical materialist analysis to it, of course. But yeah, her work is terrific. She has really good books on the subject, and yeah, Eddie and Moncrief is basically what I'd recommend.
Yeah, this is the book I would recommend. I mean, definitely read mine, but when I was getting my master's in healthcare administration, which I haven't finished, I've got like half the credits I need before I lost my last job and stopped getting the degree for free. So I'm on a hiatus right now. But either way, when I was doing my master's degree in healthcare administration, I would cite this book about every week, just a really comprehensive view of the American healthcare system and all the contradictions of capitalist healthcare, the way that capitalism induces people with mental and physical health issues, makes people sick, and then tasks doctors with the impossible task of making people well when they're being exploited 40 to 60 hours a week and living in poverty. And what doctors end up doing is just giving people pills to mask the symptoms, giving people opiates, giving people amphetamines, giving people whatever to just get them through the day. And we get a healthcare system that really can't even be called a healthcare system. And it's an exploitation system. 60% of Americans at some point experience medical debt. It's a system that traps you in debt, a system that makes tons of money off of you by selling you healthcare. And there are so many examples of this, like with C-sections. Like 30% of births now are C-section births, and that's more dangerous for the mom and the child. But because C-sections are a more expensive surgery, doctors are going ahead and prescribing more C-sections than they need to, because they can make a lot of money on it. And a lot of doctors own their own practice now, and they basically become like petty bourgeois small business owners. So rather than providing you the best healthcare, trying to keep the community as well as possible, they're selling you as much as possible. Rather than producing healthcare based on the use value of it, they're producing healthcare based on the exchange value that they can create, or the surplus value that they can create, which is the distinction I make in this, using Marx's Capital Volume 1 and the different kinds of value that he lays out. But yeah, it's a really important topic. Also, Carlos and I have written some good articles. There's an article I wrote about rural healthcare and how rural healthcare is failing in America, and then juxtapose that to the healthcare systems in Venezuela and Cuba, how they've been expanded to expand access, even though these are poorer countries. Again, that's an article I wrote for my healthcare administration class, so gave it to a bourgeois professor and had it peer reviewed by people who aren't communists, aren't Marxists. Got really good marks on it, or grades on it, or whatever too. But so we've got some like scholarly stuff, we've got some more casual stuff, but yeah, it's really important to understand capitalist healthcare, especially if you live in the US, where we have the freaking private insurance, man. Like that is it's just a private tax. It's just a middleman, mafia style middleman in between you and your healthcare that doesn't even exist in social democratic countries. So yeah.
I wanted to address this one. It seems like a really good question to tackle. Do you want me to take the first stab at it?
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a million and one ways to go about this, because I think in part the terms idealist and materialist, they're a little tricky to define because they completely changed their meaning after Marx and Hegel. Before that, it was fairly easy to categorize a philosopher as idealist or materialist, but in both Marx and Hegel, you have this almost like paradigmic shift that overcomes the separation of thinking and being, such that the prioritization of one or the other which was the main marker for calling one person materialist or the other idealist, is overcome, because what's emphasized is action, praxis. So that redefines completely. Uh, so, so like we call Hegel an idealist, but he's nothing like any of the previous idealists, but he's also nothing like the previous materialists. So within this new refoundation of philosophy, on the basis of this new unity, um, inextricable unity of thought and being, you have Marx and Hegel. And the only reason why we could call Hegel an idealist, um, besides just picking some more idealist passage, he's got more materialist passages and it's more worldview, logical stuff. But it would be for his social analysis. In his social analysis, he, yes, critiques certain inequalities that exist within the capitalist system, but he's not doing what we do, which is have a more dialectical analysis than Hegel, have a more concrete analysis, and show the ground of every mode of life being the productive relations, the economic base of society. So with that refoundation of the each concept, idealist means when you're unable to see how the economic base of society determines everything else, and then everything else at some point develops a relative independence and reconditions that which it is determined by. It's a reciprocal relationship, but idealist means you emphasize the superstructural factors to the detriment or the ignoring of the productive economic base factors. Materialist means, in this new sense, that you're always grounding your analysis on the role of the economic factors as the point of departure, as Marx and Engels would say. So yeah, every liberal, from this standpoint, is an idealist, because you will never see a liberal analysis that's rooting itself in the mode of production. This is the difference. Someone else had asked about Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty talks a lot about inequality. He shows with a consistent empiricism, not a materialist dialectical analysis, the systematic production of inequality by capitalism and the fact that we can do something different. But his analysis is rooted in the moment of distribution or in the moment of circulation. It's not rooted in the moment of production. So it's still working within a post-production moment. And the solutions that are brought up, because the analysis is not rooted in the moment of production, are not going to be the correct solutions. It's not the materialist. So in that sense, it still has some of that bourgeois idealism, but with socialistic sensibility. So yeah, to answer it short, yes, every liberal, from that understanding of the categories of idealist and materialist, every liberal is necessarily by definition idealist.
And if you get a non-Marxist historian like Edward Baptiste, who gave like a materialist analysis of slavery, he ends up pissing off all the liberal economists and the liberal historians because he refutes their dogmas. Because he begins his analysis from the place of production, looking at slavery as a mode of production and how extracting more surplus value out of the slaves became the motivator for the enslavers, and how class struggle ultimately is what led to the Civil War and culminated in this change of the slave mode of production towards capitalism. And there was this huge backlash against that from these liberal economists because it blew apart some of the dogmas that they had preached about slavery, that were just that. They were dogmas. They had no proof or no argument behind them. Yeah, I'd agree. But I think our guest is here to talk about Bolivia. So
Yes. Well, here's our friend Dan Schoenbaum, a journalist and writer for the Institute, who currently lives in Bolivia and has been covering a lot of Bolivian issues for us. He's the one that did the recent documentary that you can still see on our channel. It's the last video we put up on the 20. It was a conference that was done in April by the Mass. But Dan, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself? Maybe a little bit about that video documentary that we put up yesterday, and And yeah, and then we can ask you about what's coming up this week in Bolivia. But yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carlos and Eddie. Thanks so much for having me on. It's such an honor to be on the stream. You all put out such great work, and yeah, I just want to give people a short introduction to who I am. My home is in the U.S. In the Midwest, actually, and I've been in Bolivia for just over a year, like 13 months at this point, and living here with my husband and our two cats. And we are, one of our big motivating factors in coming here was that we were coming here in hopes of being able to study and report on, if possible, the movement that we know as MAS, and kind of the burgeoning socialism that's happening here, the politics here. So I'm so grateful to have this opportunity from you all to be able to do that in this place. So please feel free to interrupt me, but basically, first of all, I hope you enjoy the MAS merch that I've got on display here. I figured it was a good opportunity. You said this was maybe more a chill stream, so I figured some fun stuff like this you might appreciate. But basically, we just released that video, this kind of 10-minute documentary. I suggest everybody go watch it if you can. That was basically almost all the footage was taken from footage that I captured going to a rally that MAS held. It was actually back in March. I think March 26th was the date, and is significant because that was the 28th anniversary of the founding of the party of MAS. IPSP. Basically, there you got it up on screen, I see. And you can see in the beginning these murals that are full of pro-MAS propaganda that you see. You can't avoid these when you go from city to city on roads in Bolivia. They're everywhere, and there's no other party that's represented this way. But basically, it's been a little bit difficult as a foreigner of my class and my background to kind of get to know working class Bolivians, let alone kind of activist Bolivians in the scene in this sense. And one way that I've found as kind of an entrance is to just go to these mass events that the party holds at various times. So I went in December to an event that was a little closer. I live in a city called Cochabamba in Bolivia. I can get a little more into kind of the geography and the political geography here if you want, but basically I went to a town called Sacaba, which is kind of a suburb of Cochabamba. And Sacaba, people might know as one of the scenes of one of the great massacres that happened under the coup government in 2019. But Sacaba was where they held a kind of anniversary rally to mark the anniversary of Evo's first election in 2005. Evo Morales, that is the former president of Bolivia and the current president of MAS, you can see in these videos. And so that was kind of my first experience back in December with one of these mass events. And basically I had heard, from watching social media that the party was revving up for this big rally in March to celebrate the anniversary of the founding of the party altogether. And so that was a little farther away. That was like a 7-hour bus ride into the Tropico de Cochabamba. This is like the Amazon rainforest section of Bolivia. This is like where the Amazon meets the Andes, basically. And you can see how much it's raining in this footage. It was this massive event. The stadium held supposedly 35,000 people, and it seemed like at least that many people trying to get in outside. I mean, it was maybe not at least that many, but a large number of people were coming to this event. And you can see here, basically I went around the crowd, and just before the event happened, I interviewed kind of as many people as would talk to me. And so what you're seeing here are kind of the working class base of the party giving their opinions on what have MAS's principal achievements been in their 28 years of history, what are the challenges that they face in the future, MAS's messages for the world as expressed by the party base. So I hope that I was able to contribute something that a lot of other people weren't there to cover. Most people had their cameras trained on the stage. Understandably, there were really important speeches being given about kind of the political lines in MAS that are going on right now. And so you'll see some of that in this video, but mostly the video is, just to let the people, the militantes, the militants of the party speak from their own perspective. So that's what the video is about. And I got to shout out my editor, Colin Lipinski, who did an incredible job of taking, a bunch of hours of, hard to understand video. Not just because of the language difference, but also accents and ambient sound and everything. And I think made something really beautiful with it that I think Colin should be very proud of.
Absolutely. The short video looks like a professionally done documentary.
Absolutely. You should both be super proud of it. We just posted it on our YouTube and TikTok. I'm interested to see the kind of traction it'll get on TikTok as they're now promoting more long form content. But it was such an interesting watch for me and Carlos. We loved it. And so, I feel really honored that we got to host the documentary you guys put together on our platform.
I mean, the honor is all ours. It's just a pleasure to be able to give these people their voice. Multiple people, when I talked to them, said, as soon as I stopped recording, like, I hope you tell people what we really said here, because a lot of the time the media distorts the opinions of not the followers, the supporters of Mas, the party base. And so I can only hope that we accurately reproduced, the sense that they were giving us.
Yes, I wanted to ask you a question because there's also a big event coming up this week that you will be going as the Institute's official reporter. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what the relationship of this upcoming event is to the one that you cover in the documentary? Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, yes, as you can see, from this documentary, this kind of 10-minute video, the rally that I went to in March that this video, was made at, basically, was not an official kind of political event. And I mean, obviously it was political, but it was a celebration more than anything. It was this anniversary event, and there were no kind of decisions being taken by the leading bodies of the party at this event. No votes were held or anything like that. So in a way, people were very open because it was pretty casual. Just walking around, people were like selling a ton of stuff. As you can see, I bought a bunch of the stuff that they were selling, but also food and things like that. And it was in a big sports stadium. And basically, so that was that event happened back in March. And, even at that time, a lot was going on with Mas. I can get a little more into that. But coming up just this week, starting Tuesday, right? So October 3rd, 4th, and 5th, Mas is going to have its 10th Ordinary Congress, its 10th National Congress of the party in a little town called Lauca Enye that is also in the Tropico de Cochabamba. So, nearby where this rally was held. And, you might be able to tell this is one of Mas's great bases for its political support is this area. They're holding this Congress for the party in this little town. And there's a lot that's kind of been suggested will be on the agenda. It's a 3-day Congress. So I'm basically going, I've got a hotel room. I'm going to show up. I'm going to see who I can talk to as much as possible. We're, trying to hit up some friends of ours, as I understand, and see if we can get contacts. But one of the big issues is that I encourage everybody to read the full article that you all allowed me to publish on Midwestern Marx as well. That's linked in the description of this video. But I get into it a little bit in the article, kind of the political context of not just this coming Congress, but even this rally was kind of full of political discourse, if not political decisions outright. And one thing that I think it's important for people to understand about Bolivia and the situation there currently is, I think reasonably, I don't know, reasonably or not, but I think a lot of kind of the international left, for lack of a better term, got tuned into Bolivia through the coup in 2019. Especially, I can only speak for my perspective as, U.S. American who was, wrapped up in the Bernie movement at that time in 2019. This is kind of the height of that whole culture. I think a lot of people tuned in, and what they saw was they realized, oh, there's in fact in Bolivia, in this place in the heart of South America, they have an indigenous socialist movement that is in power. Not only did they have at that time the presidency, but this is a party that since the early 2000s, even since the late 90s rather, has been taking over, I mean, every level of government in huge swaths of the country. Municipal, the equivalent of state level, departmental authorities, as well as national ones. So you have this incredibly, well entrenched and developed socialist movement in many ways, and you had people, you had this very messy and eventually bloody coup that took place in 2019. There were, people from kind of more European backgrounds coming in, like storming the presidential palace in the capital, waving a Bible, and their preacher is talking about, Jesus Christ is returning to the presidential palace at this time. We're going to expel Pachamama, which is, the deification or personification of Mother Earth. Pachamama literally means Mother Earth in Quechua, and, is an indigenous tradition. So it was very easy, I think, for people at that time in sort of the US and international left more broadly to say, oh, this is such an easy, situation. Here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. We should support the good guys as much as possible. I think, a lot of people kind of had that knee-jerk reaction. And then for the people who kept on the story, they noticed that, that was in late 2019, the coup. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And the coup regime, the government de facto, as it's called at the time, kept delaying the elections, partly using COVID as an excuse. But eventually the elections did happen in late 2020, the makeup elections, after the first ones in 2019 were sabotaged. And Mas won those elections outright and overwhelmingly. And in the first round, you see graffiti all around Bolivia that says 55%, or it's almost 55%. We are 55%. We are the majority here, and we made that clear because we defeated the coup. And I think that a lot of kind of the international left saw that and celebrated rightfully, right? But kind of thought that that was the end of the story. And of course, no story really ends in politics, let alone anywhere else. And so I think that a lot of people tuned out of the political process in Bolivia at that time. And, like in a lot of places in the world right now, there is a lot of tension in Bolivia, politically, economically, socially. And the damage that the coup caused, I think, was longer lasting and deeper than a lot of people understand currently in kind of the international left scene. So, on one level, I think there's a lot to learn from Mas's, in the general sense, Mas's kind of mass democracy that they have built, this democracy of the working classes and of indigenous people in particular in Bolivia. But at the same time, they still have issues and they're working through them. And I think seeing that kind of process firsthand will be really valuable, I hope, for Marxists in the US and elsewhere. One of the big developments that happened just recently is just a week ago today, this past Sunday. It's important for people to understand, I think, that Evo Morales was he was the first indigenous president in Bolivia. He won the elections in 2005 when it was still called the Republic of Bolivia, and oversaw a constitutional reform process that ended up with a new constitution in Bolivia. It's now the plurinational state of Bolivia. And Morales ran for president and won that office a couple times after that. So I think there were 2 elections after that he ran and won. And then came the election in 2019. And, under threat of, arrest or even assassination by the military clique that was running the coup at that time, Morales fled the country. And when finally Janine Áñez, the kind of notorious self-proclaimed president after the coup happened, passed the legislation to institute new snap elections to kind of resolve the political crisis, part of that legislation prohibited anyone who won the last 2 terms from running again. So Morales was not legally allowed to run for president after that point in the makeup elections in 2020. So the party Mas responded by selecting an alternative candidate. That is the current president of Bolivia who won those snap elections. That's Luis Arce. The situation is too complex to reduce to personalities, obviously, but Arce represented sort of a different wing of the Mas coalition, shall we say. And the country has, in some ways, recovered a lot from the coup period, but economically, they seem to have, by a lot of accounts, kind of reached the same level of GDP and development that they were at before the coup, but not really surpassed it. And the way the world is going, you really got to keep building, is how a lot of people feel. And they feel that that kind of progress in the movement hasn't happened since that election and since the kind of ousting of Morales and his closest circle of leadership from national leadership. And so just a week ago today, this past Sunday, Evo Morales announced that he is going to be running for president in the upcoming election. There's another election coming up in 2025. A big question was whether Arce was going to be the Mas candidate again for that election, or if Morales was going to put himself up again for a run. And it has become clear that he is planning to do that. Mas has a system for primaries. It's a little bit complicated, the history, but basically this Congress is happening just a week plus a week and a couple of days after that announcement. It's happening about 6 months after this rally that I filmed and reported from back in March. And a lot of people, I think, are seeing this as an opportunity to draw some pretty explicit political lines for the future movement of Mas. So that's what we're hoping to cover in Bolivia, in Lauca this coming week. I'm going on a bus tomorrow. It's going to be like a 6-hour drive, and then I'll be there for a couple of days to see what we can find.
Well, that sounds super exciting, and thank you so much for providing that very eloquent and comprehensive, yet surprisingly concise view of the last few years in Bolivia, a country that I think we should all be supporting. They've done marvelous things in constructing socialism and uplifting the living standards of their people and the working classes and indigenous folks. We look forward very much to your reporting from this upcoming Congress, and hopefully we'll have you back on afterwards so you can break the news of what it was that happened here to the Institute's viewers. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything else that you would like to plug before you go?
I don't think so. Just, watch the video, read the article. The article's long, so, you can skim it if you want. But I think there's a lot of context in there for what's been going on the last couple of years and where we're heading in the next year or so. I think I could kind of go on about this for a long time, and I'm not going to, but just kind of an interesting context point is that Bolivia was, in terms of the Spanish Empire on the mainland of the Americas, Bolivia was the last country to win its independence. That was in 1825. We're talking about Bolivar, I think, came over to Colombia in 1811, something like that. So this is a country that went through a lot of struggle and was held back in a lot of ways from progressive change, even relative to the rest of the region. But because 1825 is their independence date, the elections that are coming up in 2025 they coincide with the bicentennial of Bolivia's independence. So there's a great feeling here for all kinds of reasons that we're at this turning point. And like you said, I think the achievements of Mas and the socialist movement in Bolivia have been enormous and have been an example for the rest of the region. And I hope they can be an example for us in the US as well. That's one of the things that we're aiming for here.
Absolutely, brother. Beautifully said. Very much looking forward to hearing from you again about this Congress, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Carlos and Eddie. Thanks for having me, and talk to you soon. Have a great rest of the stream.
Sounds good. Solidarity, man. Appreciate
Solidarity.
it. Well, that was
our comrade Dan. Very informative. There's a lot of things that we had to traverse lightly through because we don't want to provide any material for the imperialist media, but there's always going to be contradictions. It's foolish to think that in a revolutionary process, it's going to be contradiction less. That's the archetype of non-dialectical thinking. So I think that what we're going to be seeing in this upcoming Congress is perhaps some of those contradictions at play. Hopefully, it's not too serious, and Mass can continue its wonderful process of constructing towards socialism.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, the fact I had to mute our ultra leftist Maoist friend Reclaimed in the chat because he was annoying me. But he said something like, well, Bolivia's faced a coup attempt and the IMF and World Bank have tried to push neoliberal policies on them. Well, what do you expect? What do you expect? A country trying to build socialism in the 21st century. Of course, they're going to be attacked by the global US-dominated financial system who's going to try and push neoliberalism on them. Of course, they're going to undergo, they have to fight back against coup efforts and coup attempts backed by the US. That's something that all socialist countries have to face, right? That doesn't mean they're not real socialism or they're impure, so therefore we can't support them or label them as a country constructing socialism, because they absolutely are. Look at what they've done with the coca industry. Look at what they've done with the lithium industry. All the major industries. I mean, if you wanted a good word to describe Bolivia, I think resource socialism would be a good word. Because no, they're not a one-party state dominated by a communist party, but their huge sections of the government are controlled by the Socialist Party, who are taking the resources, nationalizing them, and investing them in the people. And the nationalization of lithium is a huge thing that sparked the coup in 2019. And Elon Musk bragged about that on Facebook or on Twitter. And if you know Bolivia's history a little further back, it's always been like that. The Cochabamba water wars, where the U.S. helped put in power some neoliberal guy who privatized water and privatized, things that had been nationalized and that had been available to the people. So people started dying of thirst and dehydration. So it started basically a war and uprising for the nationalization of these industries, right? These contradictions being at play doesn't mean that we dismiss them as not real socialism. It's absurd. Like, yeah, we would love for Bolivia to be a one-party communist state like Laos, Vietnam, and whatever, but that's not the path that they're following to building socialism. And as Marxists, to look at all these different forms of 21st century socialism, like Venezuela and Bolivia, who have taken alternate paths to power, right? As Marxist-Leninists, we should support that, right? Because it's not about following the dogma, following the doctrine of Marx exactly, step by step by step. It's about finding new ways, innovative ways to bring the working class into power, to raise the standard of living of working class people and better their conditions and construct socialism. Right. And this is why we need to abandon the purity fetish. This is why we need to abandon, this or that country isn't real socialism because there was a coup there, because they had neoliberal policies pushed on them, or because they had to make some capitulations to the market. Like, yes, we can debate these things, criticize these things, discuss these things. And, there is if a country isn't actually trying to construct socialism, we should acknowledge that. But Bolivia absolutely is. The MAS absolutely is. What they're doing with their resources and nationalizing them and investing them in the people is exactly what we would expect the 21st century socialist country to be doing. So, to write them off and dismiss them because they're not an ultra-left one-party state is just so silly in the 21st century, where our number one enemy is imperialism. And you have these countries like Venezuela and Bolivia who have found alternate routes to bringing the working class to power, using the electoral system and using, sort of populist coalitions, organizing indigenous people in the region and focusing on the specific struggles and forms of oppression that they face, to just write that up, be like, no, it's not real socialism. It's not as good as Chairman Gonzalo. Like, shut the hell up.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, we haven't had a revolution that led to a communist party dominated dictatorship of the proletariat since 1959. It's unfortunate, but the last one was Cuba. You can make the argument that perhaps Burkina Faso and there's some projects in Africa that had it for a while before they were overthrown. But I mean, the reality is that since 73 at least, with 71 since Allende before he got couped, the route that socialist construction has taken in the vast majority of the world has been they win bourgeois elections, and very slowly they start transforming the bourgeois state into a worker state, changing the economy, nationalizing some things, and that's been the route. It hasn't been this complete expropriation of the bourgeoisie within a few years, and the political state of the working class. That hasn't occurred since, at least to my knowledge, 1959, and it's really around 1960, 1961 until it happens in Cuba. So um, it is what it is. This is the route that revolutionary processes have felt that is the only one that they could really take. There's room for critique, but if you're going to critique, have it be informed by the debates that are going on in these parties. Have it be informed by what communists and socialists and progressive forces in the areas are saying. Don't just debate on the basis of this abstract purity fetish, this pure idea that you have in your mind that you then expect reality to accommodate itself to. That's not how the world works.
Exactly. I'm trying to. We have someone in our chat who's new to socialism and is asking about the gulags and the killing fields. And check out Noah Kratchvik's clips that we've uploaded on YouTube about the gulags and about the historical context of the gulags and about how the American prison system is much, 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 much worse than the gulags ever were. And how the Soviet Union was one of the first countries in the world to do away with labor camps as a form of punishment and rehabilitation. And then an article from Thomas Riggins, it's a review of Philip Short's book about Pol Pot and the killing fields that shows lots of historical evidence about Pol Pot not being a Marxist, about Pol Pot's higher up saying that they didn't read Marx, they didn't understand Marxism, they weren't really trying to build socialism. They were more leading the Khmer people in this sort of nationalistic and what ultimately ended up being sort of terroristic and murderous campaign. But I would recommend you read those or check out those forms of content because we cover those topics in depth. And those are important things that it makes sense that there's a reason the bourgeoisie talks about the killing fields and talks about the gulags all the time, because they can serve as a barrier to socialism. Like, why would we want to recreate gulags and why would we want to recreate killing fields? But those things have nothing to do with socialism, and the capitalist prison system is far worse than the gulags ever were. I want to talk about this. Unless you had something to say about the gulags and Pol Pot, Carlos.
Just the gulags. Our country has 4% of the global population and 25% of the prison population. Those are numbers that by far outdo anything that you can find in the Soviet prison system, what we call the gulags, which is just like a re-educational prison system. We have to understand that the Soviet Union, before it was the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik Revolution was immediately invaded by basically all of the imperialist powers and their lackeys. It was invaded by, I believe, by 14 or 17 countries. That was the reality that it existed in. It was blockaded in the same ways that we see Cuba and the DPRK and Venezuela blockaded today. It had a lot of strife within it, the old forces from the old Tsarist order that were still living there. And
and how were the prisons under the Tsarist monarchy? I mean, people were being tortured, people were dying of starvation. There were mass repression and imprisonment of people who would speak out against the monarchy, who would speak out against the Romanov family. You'd be thrown in jail for doing so. Lenin was sent to exile for doing so.
You have estimates of there being more than 100,000 Western spies in the Soviet Union, and then they get very predictably invaded by Hitlerite Nazi forces. So it's constant pressure and hybrid warfare from the West and from the Nazis and from internal counter-revolutionary collaborators. So yeah, there were things like gulags, but it's not this horrific thing. It's a product of how the Soviet Union was forced to develop. And if you really want something horrific where basically innocent people are shoved in a box for a good chunk of their life and then removed of their democratic rights to vote and participate in politics afterwards, you have to look at the US. Because 90% of the people incarcerated are there for nonviolent offenses that are rooted in the fact that they're poor as shit because they're working class in a capitalist society. So,
Yep. Absolutely. Speaking on the role of nationalism in the imperial periphery, yeah, anti-colonial nationalism has been huge. And the Soviet Union made the distinction of supporting nationalist movements like Mossadegh in Iran, Nasser in Egypt, who had socialistic economic policies based in nationalizing certain industries, but they called themselves nationalists. Fidel Castro himself called himself a Cuban nationalist when he was leading the revolution against the Batista dictatorship, and then later on recognized that there could be no true anti-colonial sovereignty or real freedom for Cuba without control of their economy, without socialism. So eventually announced that the revolution was specifically socialist in character. But there's this excellent video, and this is more about patriotism in the imperial periphery, but there's this video that Kayla Pop, our comrade, posted on Twitter when the Pat Sock patriotism debate was popping off. And I can't find it right now, but she's interviewing a Venezuelan Chavista, this Venezuelan organizer, and she asked him about patriotism because it was a hot button debate in the American left. And he's like, yeah, take up your flag. You know, what's left for the people of America but to take up your flag and claim the country back from the imperialists, from the oligarchs. So it's interesting that you have people on the left in the U.S. talking about how patriotism is evil, patriotism is chauvinism, patriotism automatically equals what we would call super patriotism and American exceptionalism used to justify imperialism. When, Venezuelan organizers, Venezuelan Chavistas who have actually been successful in bringing a socialist party to power, saying the opposite. They're saying that you can sublate patriotism, that you can use the patriotism of the working class to your advantage. And, that just gets ignored in the debate here in the U.S. And the anti-patriotism people will just call you a Pat Sock and a chauvinist and evil, and they won't even engage in this debate. Or listen to what the Venezuelan Chavistas are trying to tell us about patriotism. It's just everyone who talks about patriotism is an evil Pat Sock, and I'm not going to listen to them. So I have my own position on the debate. I think patriotism could be valuable. When I walk down the street, I see American flags flying outside of people's houses, and it's not just white chauvinist imperialists. It's everybody. Everybody has a natural sort of attachment and affinity towards their home country. So I think that we should utilize it. But at the very least, I think it's a debate that we should have. And it's a debate that we should have without canceling people and causing more splits and calling them evil Pat Socks, because it's a conversation worth having. Yeah.
No, you exhausted that topic. I wanted to say that it was nationalism that led Ho Chi Minh to Leninism. It makes this very explicit. He was a nationalist, and it was nationalism that led him to Marxism, Leninism. As far as patriotism, you have to look at the class character of things. Super patriotism is this imperialist creation that's it's hollowed out. It's just pure appearance. There's no substance behind it. Because patriotism means love of the people. And how do you love the people if you immiserate them, if you, enslave them to debt, and if you send them abroad to lose limbs, lives, and souls, fighting against people whom they have more in common with than you, the people who send them there, the elite. You can't love the people and have the situation that we have right now in the U.S. So that super patriotism bullshit, it's not patriotism at all. It's just bullshit. It's pure ideology to have people consent to the way that things are. A real patriotism has to be rooted in dissent, especially under capitalist conditions. It has to be rooted in challenging imperialism, and challenging capitalism, and challenging a role where a small group of parasitic elite control and own everything, and the vast majority of people are just told to go fuck themselves and live in poverty and indebtedness. Um, that's if patriotism is understood as love of your people, um, that is the only form patriotism can take. The struggle for socialism. That's it.
Exactly. You don't love your country if you're advocating for your country to be capitalist in the 21st century, especially the United States, because imperialism is decaying and destroying our country and causing all our money to be spent on wars abroad rather than invested here at home. When's the Jazz 3 deadline, Carlos?
December 1st.
December 1st. Very good. Thoughts on Claudia de la Cruz running for president? Yeah, we like third-party candidates. Don't vote for the Democrats. I think it makes sense for Claudia de la Cruz is PSL, right?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense for her and her running mate or Cornel West and I know they have differences from Cornel West, which is why I'm glad they're running, because they can push, this strict anti-imperialist ML line that Cornel West isn't pushing. But I think it makes sense, once we get down to crunch time, once the election comes up, they should look and see who's polling best, and one of them should drop out and endorse the other one. Doubt that's going to happen. I know the Green Party and PSL have their differences. I think that makes the most sense strategically, to try and get one of these third parties federal funding. But either way, I'm glad they're in the debate, I'm glad they're pushing using the bourgeois election to push an anti-imperialist line. I just don't want to split the third party vote at all is my only worry, but we're hoping to have them on for an interview soon, because obviously we agree with them politically and support a lot of what PSL is doing. So
yeah, same here. My only fear is that I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm gonna support Cornel West, maybe them. I don't know, but it seems to me that Cornel West is he's the closest thing we've had to a household name that's not like Bernie Sanders on the socialist left. So, in my view, it's best to perhaps get behind that effort. But it's if they're doing it, I think it's cool to support them and give them a platform and help them share the word, because it is one that we agree with a lot more than Cornell's. But I don't know. It's not with Cornell in the race. I don't know if that's something I should have done. But but regardless, it's happening. What's interesting is that supposedly RFK is going to announce an independent run this week. So that could really fuck things up for the Democrats. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. It follows him an assassination attempt against him, where Biden is refusing to give him Secret Service protection, which is something we covered. Obviously, of all the third-party candidates or outsider candidates other than Marianne, I guess Robert F. Kennedy is the one we have the most disagreements with, but he's clearly better than the Democrats. He's telling the truth about the war in Ukraine for the most part. And dude, there's just no point to running as a Democrat. Like the election's rigged, the party's rigged. It's corrupt. They don't even try and hide it, really. They rig it out in the open. Ever since WikiLeaks revealed that the DNC was collaborating to stop Bernie, and Hillary was feeding stories to her friends in corporate media who would blast stories about Bernie Sanders or pro-Hillary stories or anti-Trump stories. Like, they don't even really try and hide the corruption. I'll never forget this. It was overlooked, and I can't find the clip anymore, but there was a clip on MSNBC when it looked like Bernie was going to win the primary, where they were saying, well, the super delegates technically decide, right? They technically decide the party nominee. It's not the voters. So even if the Democratic voters vote for Bernie, the super delegates could just appoint Hillary. They were floating that idea of saying, we're not going to follow the democratic will of the people in this primary election. We're just going to ignore them and appoint Hillary as the head of the party, because it's technically a party election and not a federal election, so we don't have to observe democracy. That's what MSNBC was saying. And you know for sure that if all the shenanigans didn't go on behind the scenes and somehow Bernie Sanders actually was able to win, they would have done that. The superdelegates most likely would have just gone with Hillary. So what's the point in running in a primary that's completely rigged? And I know RFK is a lifelong Democrat or a lifelong liberal, but it's time to realize what the party is. It's basically a bunch of neocons. It's the party of Anthony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden. These psychotic, corrupt war criminals. And it's not going to be reformed. It's just not. So I'd rather see him run as an independent and spread that message outside of the rancid Democratic Party, and hopefully pull some people out of the Democratic Party, open some people's eyes up who are still convinced that this is the party of labor and that this is the party that's better than the Republicans. They're not anymore. They're the same thing, if not worse. They're two different sides of the same coin.
What do you think of the people that are saying that he's going to pull more votes from Trump than from Biden?
That's definitely a possibility. I would have to look at the polling data, but yeah, especially now because, I mean, the way the primary works is you have to be registered. So most Trump people are registered Republican, so they couldn't have voted for him, but now he's on the table. I don't know. I have to imagine he'd still pull more Democrats just because, like, I think the Kennedy name holds weight with a lot of Democrats in the U.S. who have nostalgia for the Democratic Party when it sort of stood behind unions and labor, and they want to return to that. But yeah, I don't know. Tough to say. You'd have to look at the polling data, and not all polls are made equal. So you got to look through the methodology even when you do that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think that any move to attempt to break the current duopoly is has potential for being progressive. Kennedy is far from being a perfect candidate. His position on Israel-Palestine, of course, is horrific, and there's a lot of other stuff that we disagree with him vehemently on, but he's a hell of a lot better than Biden, and I think he's a hell of a lot better than Trump, who, I mean, at the beginning of this electoral process, he was positioning himself as the anti-war candidate. Now he's the guy that wants to invade Mexico. So I've heard you say it before, and I agree. He takes these hawkish positions on whether it's Mexico or China or whatever, I think perhaps as a way of showing the deep state that, hey, I'm still your guy. I'm ready to do it, even if I talk the talk with this one issue that my base is fully critical of, which is the war in Ukraine. I'm still going to be the hawk you need me to be, as I was when I was president against Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, etc. So China, yeah. So, I think RFK is in many ways better than both of the people from the Democratic and Republican Party. It doesn't mean he isn't highly imperfect, or that he's better than West, or he's not. But if he can start something up, and maybe, who knows? I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a magic 8-ball.
Right. It's good to have more anti-establishment voices in the fray, though, I think. Yeah. This is probably the last question we should take, and then I got to hit the hay. I just realized it's 11 o'clock. I got practice tomorrow morning. But opinions on Freudian Marxism. I'm for mixing psychology and Marxism because of very real brainwashing in America. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is more of a question for Carlos, but I think there is a role for Marxist psychology or a Marxist view of psychology. You just have to be very careful to not stray into eclecticism and end up like Zizek talking about mixing Lacan and Marxism, and where you end up is just liberalism. He's like, well, you mix Lacan plus Marx equals being a liberal and supporting imperialism every time. I mean, what the liberals try and do is individualize everything and psychoanalyze, these boogeymen of the United States to try and convince people to support regime change. So, while I think psychological analysis is important, you just have to be careful when you start mixing anything with Marxism that you don't stray into eclecticism. Like, you want to make a Marxist analysis of psychology that starts itself from production. You don't just want to start taking liberal psychologists and trying to, shoehorn them into Marxism, which is kind of what it seems like Zizek does sometimes. But that would be my uneducated answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, Freud brings about some form of a revolution in how we think about the individual. The fact that now it's just generally accepted that there's all these unconscious motives and that we're not just rational actors, and that 100% of our conscious activity is rational, conscious activity, that a lot of the stuff we do is a result of unconscious things. That's an important contribution, and in many ways I think there's a way that you can develop that into a really good Marxist analysis of how ideology functions at the level of individual psychology. People have tried. Unfortunately, they've been from the Western Marxist tradition. There's rational kernels in some of the stuff that they've produced, and there's a lot of mystical shells because of their deeply rooted purity fetish positions with regard to actually existing socialist states. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I know there's people that treat the subject in a way that's interesting. We have friends that are psychoanalysts, professional psychoanalysts, and really good communists, but they're against mixing both. So it leads me to think of, whether there's the possibility to see what Marxism can provide to the questions that psychoanalysis is asking or forcing us to ask ourselves. I don't know if there's no go-to theorist, I think, at the moment. Perhaps there is in China, but there's in the English there aren't any that I would recommend.
It'd be super interesting to see the stuff that's coming out of China in that field. But yeah, we got to learn to speak Mandarin, I guess.
Yeah. That's the future. Just like everyone at one moment or now speaks English. Hopefully. Although I don't know, man, because even the Chinese struggle to speak Mandarin. That shit's fucking hard. I heard the kids, they don't fully learn the language until they're 10.
Holy crap.
How complex it is. Yeah, especially writing, like the characters and just how many characters you have to remember is incredibly difficult. So I don't know if it could ever universalize like English did, but who knows? I mean, we have friends of ours that have gone to China and learned the language in some years, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting how many fields China and the Soviet Union were advancing in. Like, even Soviet epigenetic research, genetic research, had been lambasted for years, and they accused Vygotsky of creating all these famines by trying to, force dialectical materialism into the field of anthropology and genetics, and Mendelian genetics are infallible. But now epigenetic research is showing that the Soviets and not Vygotsky, but Lysenko, not Lysenko. I was saying Vygotsky earlier. I meant Lysenko, but Lamarckism. This sort of infusing dialectical materialism and saying that a gene's environment can change how it's passed on is being proven correct by or more correct than static, more liberal models of genetic analysis by modern research. So it's just interesting, and that's. Scholarship is so fettered by the capitalist mode of production and the interest that exists in the academy. And so, yeah, I'm sure the field of psychology is no different. But, yeah, that's all I got for today. You want to answer this question, Carlos, and then we can close out? Or respond to
it's a question. It's just a statement. Preferential option for the poor is psychology from the perspective of the poor, oppressed, and exploited segments of society, not the same as the psychology of the upper middle class. It's kind of what we're trying to do with capitalism's attack on the soul, to be honest. Analyze basically how capitalism hits home at the individual level, how it affects us, traumatizes us, how it pushes us into various addictions and various forms of behavior that are self-destructive for human beings, and how we can avoid those, and the role that avoiding those and replacing bad habits with good ones plays in being a revolutionary. So,
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this excellent Ask Us Anything stream. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had your questions answered. Thank you to everyone who sent super chats. Thank you to all our supporters at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. Thank you to all our YouTube members. Our institute is 100% viewer funded, no outside funding. It all comes from you and your small dollar donation. So thank you for that. Check out our bookstore on MidwesternMarx.com. Patreon members, $10 or more, and YouTube members get access not only to our Discord, but Carlos's book, The Purity, Fetish, and the Crisis of Western Marxism, in the form of a PDF. So yeah, am I missing anything, Carlos?
we're concluding Danny Shaw's class, Reform or Revolution, and there's a part 2 to that class we'll be offering sometime soon, and I also have a class planned on just Marxist philosophy that I'll be offering soon. And yeah, we have an awesome book from Yanis Iqbal that's going to be our next in a long list of manuscripts that we have pending publication. It's an incredibly important contribution to the Marxist-Leninist critique of bourgeois education and how Western Marxism has approached the question of science and education. So a lot of stuff, a lot of work, so you can expect a lot more from the Midwestern Marx Institute in the coming weeks and months.
Damn right. Just get ready, everyone, because the education's coming. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.